You give me a new clicker. Oh, God. Oh. Yes, it is.
Good afternoon and welcome to the Housing and Economic Development Committee. We'll begin with roll call, posting of the agenda, and the flag salute.
Member Flynn?
Here.
Member Lopez?
Here.
Chair Madrigal?
Here.
Chair, we have a quorum, and the agenda for this meeting was posted in the City Hall kiosk on Tuesday, January the 7th.
Okay. Please stand. Please put your right hand over your heart. Ready? Begin.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Moving on to item B, public comments on items not on the agenda. And it looks like we have no public comments. No? Okay. Continuing, moving on. Item C, the consent agenda, the approval of minutes.
I'll make the motion to approve the minutes.
Second?
Call for a vote. Well, I'll abstain since I was gone for the last meeting.
Did I say aye?
Aye.
Okay, so the motion carries 2-0.
Okay, motion carries 2-0. Moving on, reports. We have a report by Mr. Lambert on an update pertaining to local preference for sale or for rent housing projects within the city of Oxnard.
How do I get that to go? Oops. One moment, please.
Oh, no.
Thank you. Oh, that's loud. Jeff Lambert, Community Development Director. I'm joined here tonight by Emilio Ramirez, our Housing Director, and Elsa Brown from our Housing Department. Kathleen Mallory also worked on this report. And I want to start off by saying this was a request by Member Lopez. I apologize, it was a request in February of 2019 for this, and it took us some time. We wanted to make sure we gave you the right information, and we had other things on our plate, so I apologize for the tardiness of this response. But the question really was, can the city expand the requirement for local preference on new housing developments, particularly those that are market rate? Not just the affordable developments that we have investments in. And that's the question that was asked that we are attempting to try to answer tonight. First, you should know that we have our existing policy in the city's inclusionary housing ordinance, which is on the screen. We do require a local preference priority process when we have a project that's being built under the inclusionary housing program. That's basically the city's current policy when it comes to development and that requirement. There are additional opportunities when there's a funding project that provides, when the city provides a funding gap to developers, there's an opportunity to require in exchange for that funding support a local preference. There are also opportunities if there's a developer in the city agree to enter into an agreement, development agreement, they could incorporate that local preference as a provision of that agreement. As the council knows, we don't do full-blown development agreements on every residential project, and it really is an opportunity for a joint agreement. We can't force that on applicants, so it's not necessarily a great opportunity as well. But there are some limitations on how we can do that. The bottom line is if we have funding into the deal, into the project, we have the ability to leverage that investment with a requirement for local preference. If we don't, it's really up to our ability to enter into an agreement sort of voluntarily with that applicant. So what we highlight here were a couple of thoughts about that. We can have the council direct us based on this discussion and full council consideration that we adopt a policy that we would pursue those kinds of our policy directions for developments that have development agreements, that we would have more of a local preference as a general strategy for those development agreements for a public benefit. That's something that we could definitely pursue on a voluntary basis with developers as we go forward. We could also have a policy that we have a marketing preference, which is not a requirement, but we would encourage applicants that are not bound to do local preference, but we would encourage them by a condition of approval that they make every effort on a voluntary basis to advertise and highlight the availability of their units to folks in Oxnard first. Those are things that we think we can do. I do want to highlight the development agreement is not an easy task. We've done very few development agreements in Oxnard. They are often for large projects like River Park and Wagon Wheel, where there's a significant public benefit, broadly speaking, across the city that we can seek value from that project. They take a lot of work, as the assistant city attorney knows, a lot of city attorney time to negotiate, so it's not an easy fix, but it is something that we can consider going forward. I just want to make sure the council knows it's not an easy thing to do going forward. I also, as part of this discussion, want to just quickly update the committee on the RENA numbers. We've talked about that a lot. I think it's fair to say the sixth cycle RENA numbers for the city of Oxnard have settled. They are what they are at the moment. This highlights the unit types that we're going to be obligated to provide in the next cycle from 2021 to 2029. There is an appeal process. We are evaluating the opportunity to do that, as I know you talked about when we presented the RENA numbers to you late last year. We haven't made that final decision on whether that makes sense to do that, but something we're following closely, and the Southern California Association of Governments continues to work through the RENA process. But we thought, since we were talking about housing tonight, we should bring that up as an update to the committee. And really, we're here to ask for your feedback, but I wanted to just reiterate the two opportunities we think where we could do more for local preference, given the concerns and sort of parameters by which we could do local preference. One is when we have opportunities for development agreements and we can contract through a contract negotiation with a developer, we can get that as a public benefit. Or two, we can also, by policy, if council directs, ask that we add a standard condition on developers that don't have that obligation to encourage them as a voluntary basis to sort of advertise their units available to folks here locally from Oxnard. Short of having more city financial investment in projects, those we think are our best two choices to expand local preference in the city of Oxnard. And that concludes our presentation, and I think the three of us are here to answer questions, should you have them. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do we have any public comment? No? With no public comment, then we will move on to committee member comments. Mayor, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I am on the agenda planning committee, which meets Monday morning, and it's a rotating, on a rotating basis with members of the city council every 6 months. A new council member sits on that committee. And we do have, I'm really glad, I want to thank Mr. Lambert for bringing this issue forward at the request of committee member Lopez. And, but I want to say under these committee member comments that I would hope that we could take a look maybe at the next meeting at the future agenda items that have been requested and have not yet been able to come to the committee, and maybe have a discussion, because sometimes a committee member will ask or make a request that something be brought before the committee, and then due to a variety of circumstances, it's no longer as urgent or and needed. So it would really help, I think, with the management of future committee meetings, as well as making sure that these do not go on too long without being attended to. That's my only comment.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Lopez.
Thank you, and I do understand the amount of items and the workload on staff, so no need to apologize. But I do appreciate this, coming forward and being able to have those discussions. And where this really came from is considering the housing situation and where our city stands in protecting our residents and serving our residents first and foremost. And that's where this request came from, in looking into what is possible within the legal boundaries of how we can really encourage the developments that are coming to the city to serve the needs of our residents first. And for me, I mean, I do look to the rest of the committee for your input and suggestions, and with the guidance from staff on what is legally possible that would not put us in a situation of going into a legal battle with anyone, or preventing any developments from coming to the city because of this this requirement or this request, and how we can do that within those boundaries. So
Okay, thank you. I guess I will begin. As anyone who's lived here for any period of time, as long as you're familiar with the city, you do notice, regardless of where you live in the city, that we face a housing crisis simply every evening just trying to park your vehicle out on the street. You have, in many neighborhoods, I would say, the majority of the neighborhoods in the city of Oxnard, where parking is an issue, and I understand that we all trying to make ends meet. Meaning, if there's multiple families living in a home, it's not because of preference, but it's out of necessity. And something though that you also notice in the city of Oxnard, if you've lived here long enough, is you do have multiple individuals that own multiple homes, and it's a business. And ultimately, I'm not trying to take money away from food or money away from their family, but it does cause a huge issue within the city, because it's just a huge renting business. Many of my neighbors, there's multiple families living there, and it's same cause. Homeowner really doesn't care for the home. It's just a moneymaker. And, obviously, I don't want that same issue to arise if we were getting involved, because simply at the end of the day, you still need the money to purchase the home. And, you may be an Oxnard resident, obviously, but if it's just you're just going to rent out the home to multiple people and just make money off of it, then there's no point for the city to get involved in helping out these type of individuals. I understand that, we're trying to make things better for every single one of our residents. We just have to be careful with how we go about it. Developers want to come in, and at the end of the day, they want to make money. The more restrictions we set upon them, some of them would just get up and leave. Looking at the 6th housing cycle, we have over 8,500 units. Out of those 8,500 units, 4,000, so probably a little bit over 40%, are above moderate income. So I'm sure out of those homes, those are going to be the first ones to go. The issue is, how do we get developers to build those low-income housing, very low-income units? That's going to be the struggle, and that's how we need to be creative in trying to get developers in here to help us out, not only build the above moderate income housing, but build the rest of the housing for us. Mayor, do you have anything to say?
Yes, thank you very much. And I'm sorry I was a little bit, I wasn't attentive in the sense that I had this on my mind about I didn't want to forget, but I wanted to comment directly on the presentation. And I think what's particularly frustrating for, I would imagine, any policymaker here in this city is that, we have, if we can go just to the part of the slide that shows the RENA numbers, that, 8,529 units over in 8 years, right? It's an 8-year cycle. So it's a little over 1,000 units a year. And the Wagon Wheel redevelopment project is 1,500 units and 50,000 square feet of retail. So in essence, the RENA process, Regional Housing Needs Assessment process, state mandated process, is asking the city of Oxnard to produce 3/4 of a wagon wheel, or even 2/3 of a wagon wheel every single year. I mean, wagon wheel is like 20 years in the making, so maybe even longer. And it's just unimaginable how, of course, we're going to be able to do that. But I think one of the things that I'm particularly frustrated with, and this discussion isn't about the RENA process, it's about local preference, is that Oxnard traditionally has led the county and is leading the county in providing affordable housing. And I would say that where I don't really find the outlet or the ability to more constructively work with other cities to engage them over this, that other cities are delighted. They are happy that if Oxnard or any other community houses workers for them. And I just want to express that, Mr. Chair, and to my fellow committee member, Council Member Lopez, that Oxnard, I feel, has an obligation to do everything we can to house the people that work in our community. We really do. And I'm not saying that if someone works outside the community, we don't house them. I'm just saying that we have to, every city has a certain capacity, and Oxnard has limits, like every city has limits. And I think that we need to find a way that we are going to not only meet the state mandates, but on the other hand, work with other cities so that they understand that housing people, as our chair has talked about, just housing people has to be as much of a top public policy prerogative or objective as it is here in the city of Oxnard. So I just, sometimes I don't even know what words or what set of words to use to express this utter frustration, not only with the state mandates in process, RENA, but the fact that other communities, I think, are resisting building housing. And I understand recently we had a decision before us, which I won't mention, but it was about approving housing units. And the chair was the lone wolf, a lone ranger in approving the project, simply based on the fact that we need to build more units. And it's certainly understandable. It was a very reasonable decision on his part, also courageous with the fact that the community was opposed to the project, or large numbers were opposed to it. But I'm looking forward to working with the chair and with my fellow committee members, Committee Member Lopez, to try to figure out how we're going to not only navigate through this, but how can we give the people that are working in our community, that are living in overcrowded conditions, how can we give them even more of a leg up here in this community to live in safe, decent, first world housing, and not the kind of housing that too many of our residents are living in right now, which is unhealthy, it's unsafe, and that, of course, Mr. Chair and Committee Member Lopez, is the reason for the Safe Homes, Safe Families program. And in fact, I just wanted to announce to the committee that we're having our launch with the apartment owners for the Cuesta del Mar street on Friday, beginning to work with the apartment owners to lift up that neighborhood and eventually work with the residents to achieve some positive outcomes. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Lopez.
Yes, and thank you for actually bringing up the people that work here. That I think is also very important and can't be disregarded. It's people who have an investment in the city, and I do value that. So I think that's the other component of this. In the staff research that was done, is this something that has been done in other places that we can look at?
We've looked at the other cities in the county, and nobody in the county is doing this for market rate, non-subsidized projects. It's not happening in Ventura County.
But however, for the affordable, the work component is a local preference that
Yes.
Elsa was able to find. But again, it's that, the question that was asked of us was more on the market rate. But if we look at affordability, and if we're a partner in that affordability requirement, we have the ability to require certain things, like our local preference that we have. We could add in a work component as a layer to that. If you work in the city, that could qualify you for a local preference. You might not just have to live there. So that's something we can explore, and that's something that Elsa did find, that another jurisdiction, it was residents who already live in the jurisdiction or those who work in the jurisdiction were eligible for local preference.
Okay. And with the question with the development agreements, you mentioned that this is something that a development agreement is specific to that project. It's not like a blanket.
Right, it's a development agreement is a contract between the city and a developer, and usually the developer gets something out of the deal, some long-term commitment and sort of vesting of their rights, and the city gets something in exchange for giving that to the developer, which is some sort of public benefit above and beyond what they would otherwise have received, like traffic fees. They get something above and beyond that. That's the nature of it. So it's a negotiated deal, and the city negotiates the best deal they can to get benefits. We could decide that local preference is an important benefit when we negotiate a development agreement, and the council could give us direction that should be a consideration for future development agreements, that a local preference be included in the negotiations. So I think what's on the board are the two sort of immediate ideas that we have to sort of expand that. One is that we incorporate a policy that we seek a local preference provision in future development agreement negotiations, and second, that we incorporate a condition of approval that encourages, not requires, but encourages local marketing program when new market rate projects are happening in the city, that they market to locals first. Not only, but that they put some focus in marketing to residents in Oxnard, and perhaps, as the assistant city manager said, also workers in the city as well. And I should note too, one of the things the timing is good for this conversation because we're really about to start the housing element update in March. You might recall we came to the council late last year to kind of frame what that's going to look like and how we need to accommodate those units coming down from the state and SCAG. One of the things we also do in housing elements is update policy. So we could incorporate, if the council desires, these policies and maybe explore others through that process once we get our consultants on board who have experience in cities all over the state of California.
I actually have one quick question about that. Say, for example, I was a City of Oxnard employee who lived in a neighboring city. We had a program like this. I ended up buying a home here. But then I had, greener pastures in another city. What would that mean then? Would I have to sell the home, or because then, I don't want the issue of person gets a job elsewhere in another city or another place, and it just becomes a humongous issue later.
Council member, I think the answer to that question depends. Okay, so it turns on whether or not we have the ability to impose the requirement to begin with. And that ability is triggered when we have a contract right, i.e. we made a loan. So let's say that we made a loan to the buyer and we financed the mortgage for them to buy it. And they're in that loan agreement, we indicated that you have to own and occupy the home. We can then control the future buyer, the future occupant. But that's because we entered into a private contract. If we did not enter such a private contract and therefore and it was built as a market rate home through standard regular entitlement and permit that they go through community development, then the only thing we can do is ask that developer to market the initial transaction to the community that is in Oxnard. Once that person buys the home, say it's the city employee, then they are going to remarket to another person, and we cannot impose that same condition on that remarketing effort. So it just depends on whether or not we had that initial ability.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other comments by committee members?
Yeah, I'm trying to get as much information, at least discussed and out in terms of, what are going to be the next steps, because I'm not sure that we, are there right now. And I understand the limitations in being able to come to a development agreement with every project. And finding a way of whether it's just a standard policy that not similar to the inclusionary housing and what's legal of asking. I mean, maybe not requiring, but if there's a certain percentage also that that could be considered. I mean, sorry, I'm trying to formulate, these words, but is there a way so it wouldn't be possible to just have a policy or guidelines that could be adopted in the city?
I think the initial place for that policy would be within the envelope of the housing element, which will be working its way through the city process between now and October of 2021. And we can definitely put, and those policies have to be followed up with, and we have to show implementation of those policies in our annual reports to the state. So they have real teeth, that if the council puts a policy into the housing element to do something, we have to show that we're doing it. Otherwise, we will be out of compliance with the element. So it does have real meaning to put that in the housing element. As I put on the screen here, this is the language that you just mentioned from our inclusionary. So if somebody, and most projects are big enough to have an inclusionary obligation, and so those affordable units do have a local preference process. It just doesn't apply to the market rate units today, because we haven't had a policy. If the council wanted to do that, two things that we think of you could direct us to pursue right now. One is to pursue more development agreements with that obligation through our negotiations, and the second, that we just pursue a standard condition that requires, that encourages them to be actively marketing their units here locally. And both of those things are things that we think you could ask us to do, and we could implement through them through the housing element. I'm not sure if that answers your question, but.
On one element of that, and it states in the staff report, if we're going to have a policy similar to what Jeff just described, there's still the concern from the legal standpoint, if they're not seeking some type of concession or money from us, we have very little ability to apply that policy to their project without some risk. But having an in-your housing element, then it has an expectation, at least from the state level, that you're going to do it. So we're a little concerned about that right now. It's something we're willing to explore, but in the research that Elsa's done so far, that market rate, we've only come up with the two options that Jeff laid out of basically asking for them to do it via the condition of approval and them saying, okay, we'll do it, or a development agreement on each one. Affordable requirements, we've got a lot of tools in the toolbox, but when it's a market rate unit, which you've already pointed out, that's over half the units that we need to produce over the next 8 years, we're fairly limited at this point.
Okay, thank you.
I feel like I need to mention this. There has been several cities in California that have attempted to impose a condition that units that were built without a contract, i.e. a loan agreement or et cetera, units, in this case, market rate units that were built without a contract, those cities have been sued for that attempted local ordinance, and it was invalidated. So we have not found a place that withstood challenge or that succeeded in the idea of imposing a condition beyond affirmatively marketing. Beyond that step, we've not found a jurisdiction that has succeeded in making that a requirement.
Mayor?
Yeah, just in response to that, it seems that, you know, at a minimum, the committee could endorse an idea about marketing that seems to be safe. Where it becomes a little bit more unsafe, as the assistant city manager just stated, is if we make it a requirement, right? So I don't know how the committee would like to move on this, but it's definitely food for thought, and maybe we could direct, Mr. Chair and Member Lopez, we could direct the staff to bring this back at some point to the city council with the research about exactly what the pitfalls would be, you know, for and against an obligation to do so, and maybe the council as a whole would want to just adopt a policy that would be safer. I'm not sure. Maybe the council as a whole would say, no, I think we need to embrace this. But what I'm hearing here is that it can be a little dicey to do so, right?
I would suggest too, I mean, the housing element is going to be going on between this spring and the end of 2021, but we're not going to not talk to you between now and then. So we expect to schedule several check-ins with this committee. We can incorporate this into one of the relatively early check-ins as we start to engage the committee in the housing element policy development going forward, and bring some specific language to you for your recommendations.
Okay, thank you. We good? That's it. Just receive file, we're good? Okay, moving on. Items for future agendas. Anything on any future agenda?
And Mr. Chair, I'm sorry, that's my remarks initially were for that item, and I don't know how I skipped everything in my head here, but I don't need to make any further comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Lopez. And I have nothing as well. With that, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much.
Thank you.